Good morning, everyone. I'm Laura Cunningham here with Phil Long with another segment of Ask the Agronomist. Planning's underway across a lot of the upper Midwest. And so kind of our common questions now are, what can I expect for emergence on my corn that I planted?
Yeah, it's funny. It's going to be kind of a long, drawn-out window, it seems like. We had some that, probably shouldn't be mentioned, that planted around that Easter time frame, and many planting now and last week and so forth, and lots of questions throughout that about temperatures, which we talked about last week, and a lot of the important stuff that's, should be a high on your priority list when considering when to plant. But now we're sitting here, okay, we planted stuff maybe a week or two ago. The ones that are getting it planted now, how long is it going to take to emerge? I mean, that's the common question, but it kind of gives us an indication of, are we going to see trouble down the road this season? Is there going to be disease issues or other problems or low yield because of a decision made now? This is a really good time to slow down just a little bit and do some scouting and checking, so you know that stuff in advance. And there's obviously some things you can still change at this point. So yeah, this is a good time to review that part of the equation.
Okay, so is there a measure of say GDUs that can kind of give us an inkling of how many days it'll take for that crop to come up?
Yeah, exactly. That's a great question. I wouldn't say it's a perfect science, but I usually say 90 to 120. A lot of times corn 100, 120 or so. But it really depends, like we talked about last week, about that temperature, soil temperature, all those things combined to really determine how quick it comes out of the ground. So if you're putting it in now, we're starting to get some decent GDU accumulation. Soil temperatures are going up. It's going to emerge on the earlier side of that. If you planted 3 weeks ago, it's probably going to take all of that, going to be 125 plus GDUs. Last week, I know I was looking at some of those GDUs, and there were still only about 10, 20, 30 GDUs, depending where you're at, accumulated. That's not very much. So it's gonna push on out, take 120 plus GDUs to get emerged for that early planted stuff. On the other hand, now we're getting to the point where if we're having 70-degree highs and hopefully holding close to 50 or so on a nighttime temperature, we're getting approximately 10 or so, maybe a little bit more, 10 to 15 GDUs per day. So on average, you're going to see it come up in that 10 to 14 day window roughly, which is good. That's what we want to see. That early stuff that we planted way before now, that's why we have seed treatments. That's why we always highly encourage to make sure you're putting a seed treatment on if you're trying really early or cooler soil temperatures. But yeah, right now we're kind of sitting in that window where we want to be. Obviously ideal, I talked about 50 degrees soil temps, but ideal would be 60, 65 plus soil temps, and then it would come up, quickly. We've all planted soybeans late May and seen them come up in 3-4 days, when the soil temp is in the 60s and 70s or higher. So that's ideal for those things. So yeah, that's kind of the window you want to look for. That 90 to 120 GDUs, if you're tracking that, will kind of help you gauge how quickly it's going to come out of the ground.
Okay, so on some of those early planted fields, what can we expect for yield implications right off the top? Or are there some things that we can do to measure and start to watch that emergence?
Yeah, that's a great question too. In my mind, when I look at some of those early planted things, I did throw hand planted some of those early planted stuff a couple weeks ago. Looking at that, I do have those here. We may throw those up in a bigger picture. Not very big. You got a little soybean there pushing out, and the corn's about the same stage. Just small radicals on them, and then coleoptile pushing up, and the soybeans just starting to struggle to go upward. It's really swollen at the hypocotyl, so it's sitting there really growing really slowly. But yeah, so I would view those, to me, as a little bit of a test. And everybody keeps saying, well, I'm experimenting. Great. So go out there, and do the flag test. If you've got some different colored flags, go out there and flag them as they come up. Ideally, you want to look at that field about every day, and that gives you an indication, okay, is it coming up within days of each other, or is it coming up a week or two apart? A week or two apart is when we start getting concerned about yield loss. Obviously, the competition is going to be extremely uneven, because once we get a few weeks down the road, they will be a leaf stage or two ahead. And in that case, down the road, we'll see barren plants and so forth. So, once we get out to about a week or so, we're seeing about 6 to 8% yield loss from that. 2+ weeks delayed emergence, you're going to see upwards of 10+% yield loss. So, you don't want to see that 2 to 3 week window. That's when you may want to slow down, count those plants, and make a determination on it. Is there something we can come back and do to kind of maybe fix the problem and so forth? But yeah, that emergence window is really key when it comes to early season, in terms of corn, especially when it comes to early season things that we maybe management wise maybe could mess up or whatnot. That's one of those things that probably has the biggest yield implication. I work with a lot of planter upgrades and so forth, and all those are great. There's a lot of different options out there to really zone in on planting as best you can this time of the year when we have limited, window to do it in. But really the emergence, which is more about your depth and obviously moisture and so forth, is probably the biggest in terms of a yield hit. That singulation and spacing is important, but really the emergence window, how quickly they come up together uniformly, is the biggest, the best thing you want to see. If it comes up, you get your 32,000+ stand plants per acre and they come up all within a few days, that's what you want to see.
Okay, so I think this weekend is probably going to bring more farmers out into the field to really get started on planting. And I think diagnostics and monitoring really is important for any time frame of planting. Those are great tips for early planting, but what should others just continue to monitor throughout this planting season as they watch their crop come up?
Yeah, it's a great question too. And a lot of times I get calls and asking about this question: how quickly will it emerge and things like that? What's it looking like? Well, the ideal situation is to get out there and do a little digging. Those seeds aren't too far down. Don't wait for it to emerge would be my recommendation. Get out there, just like we scout during the season. Get out there and do some digging and see what's going on with that plant. That's your easiest indication. And the nice thing is right now, really you're just looking for some simple key things. Is it healthy or is it dead? And in those cases, we're looking for a seed that's growing and that the radicle, the first roots and the shoots and so forth are white. That's what we want. White is healthy at this point. Obviously they're not going to be green because they're not soaking up the sun and doing photosynthesis. So white is healthy. And if you're seeing brown or mushy seeds, obviously that's a really bad indication. Probably those seeds are dead and not going to come back, or diseased. They may come up, and like we talked last week about unfurling underground and so forth. If that's happening, they do come up and they may be delayed by quite a bit. But those are the ones that struggled really bad. Even seed to seed within the row, you can see differences in how they emerge just based on how they soaked up moisture. So you may see some that are diseased and then they come up and they're going to be diseased and struggle all season really if they survive. So yeah, looking for those indications. Get out there and dig down, get a good chunk of the row moved back and really get an idea for how much is out there. Is it coming up together? Those kind of things. That gives you a better indication that you can keep on going. Obviously this is a busy time of the year, but this really is a good time to scout and make sure, because we all have monitors in the planters nowadays, but they don't tell us everything. Getting out there and opening up that furrow tells you a lot, whether it's sidewall compaction or issues with maybe an in-furrow starter fertilizer or whatever you're using. There's a lot of things you can diagnose from opening up that furrow and seeing how the seed is growing and emerging.
So is there any measure of how much damage or when to really start to think about making a decision or even calling in somebody else for a second opinion?
Yeah, that's a great question. And anything in agronomy, it seems like it's but in this case, I would say, if you're seeing 10% or higher, if you're seeing stands, obviously you can narrow up that 17.5 foot window and do a small chunk and see how much is emergent, see how much is not, or how much is really delayed, and get an idea. If you're seeing 10 to 15% or more that's really struggling behind, diseased or dead, you want to make a decision on that. So it's probably time to call somebody and get a second opinion. But typically when I'm out there, especially this time of the year, we still got time to make some decisions like that. But it's a good time to catch it early, because if we get mid to late May, then we're in that window where we want to decide, okay, it's not an even stand, it's maybe uneven emergence, but you had it planted early, and that does count for something. So now we got to make the determination, how well are those plants going to compete, and is it worth trying to replant or replant areas and things like that. So yeah, it's a tough decision, and obviously it's just one that, you know, you may not have any issues, but it's a good idea to get out there and scout. That's the biggest thing to me, because that's how you learn, and that's how you learn to make different choices, you know, going down the road. And like I said, we're early in the season. That's the best part about looking at the crop now. We still have a lot of opportunities to make different decisions or add fertilizers or things like that to really help the crop continue to grow.
Being productive, always a great way to be, especially early on in the season like we are now. So any last takeaways you want to leave with our viewers before we wrap up today?
No, I think it's, like I said, this is one of my favorite times of the year. Everybody likes to go out and count kernels on the ear and stuff, but this is the key time. You know, this is the time when we can make the most decisions that really count for yield, rather than just observing it. So, you know, go out, take a look, corn and beans, and see what's going on there in the furrow before they come out of the ground.
Okay. Thanks, Phil, and thanks, viewers, for tuning in today. If you would like to take a look at any more resources regarding questions from planting to emergence topics, visit lathamseeds.com and look for the field position tab. And we'll see everyone next week with another topic.